Time now to be joined by one of our favorite guests, the great Dan Miller, Lions radio voice, and of course Fox 2 sports director. You can watch us on fox2detroit.com and the Fox local app each and every day, live from 2 to 4. Dan, how you doing, bud?
What is up, guys? How you doing?
Doing great.
Hey,
how could we not be doing great after last Saturday? Just before we get to the Lions, Dan, how impressive was that Michigan win over Ohio State to you watching it at home?
It was impressive. I mean, look, I think when you don't have your head coach, I do think that puts you in a tough spot. And I went into that game thinking that it would impact them. I came out of that game thinking that Sharon Moore pushed all the right buttons, and I thought Ryan Day played way too conservative, in particular in the first half, letting those 37-some-odd seconds run off the clock late in the half, and then the 4th and 1 where he had the option around the 50-yard line to go for it. I thought the head coaching thing deficiency flipped on me, and I thought that they played a better game. I thought there was a difference in the quarterback position as well, where I thought McCarthy certainly was the better player on the field. Critical turnover early where I thought, and I will defer to my wide receiver there who played in the NFL, I thought Harrison played soft on that interception. You got to try to go offense to defense there and try to help your quarterback out. Wasn't a great throw, but you got to do something to kind of help him there. I didn't like that play. So look, I think Michigan made the plays, Ohio State didn't, and Michigan got out of there with a victory. That's what you have to do in a game like that where there's not much separation between the two teams.
Definitely. I think Marvin Harrison is one of the most electric wide receivers I've ever seen in college. In fact, you can say he's probably the best I've seen since 25 years or so ago. But what they're teaching at Ohio State isn't team football. And I think in a moment like that, I think the physicality, the team basis, I think you see it in moments like that. If that was Michigan, I think you see a different result. But enough about it. We know we won. But you see what I'm wearing? Even though the Lions lost, I'm still hanging in there, Dan. I got my Detroit Lions hat on. I'm still representing. That's what I wanted you to hear, man.
Hey, Dan, Dan, just it seems pretty simple. Football is a very simple game. It feels like Ohio State with 2 turnovers in that game. Michigan won by 6. The Lions have had 7 turnovers in the last 4 games. I mean, they're 3-1, but you keep turning the ball over like this. That's what feels so tough about this stretch that they're in right now. They're simply not protecting the football, and it's gonna bite them here. Is it not?
It's the biggest indicator of winning and losing in football. Period. I mean, if you want to look at most games, look at the turnover percentage. Whoever takes the turnover giveaway ratio and wins that. You look at the stats. If you're +1. You have X percentage chance of winning. +2 goes up exponentially. +3, you're almost never going to lose. And when you're giving the ball away multiple times and you're not taking the ball away, which is also something that you have to look at with the Lions right now, you put yourself in a tough position. Now, you're right. They have won 3 out of 4. But you can say they were somewhat fortunate to beat the Chargers when the Chargers scored 5 touchdowns on their final 5 possessions. They were somewhat fortunate to come from 12 down in the final 4 minutes and 15 seconds to beat the Bears. And then it caught up with them against the Packers. So here's the thing. If you're the Lions, what you're trying to get back to is something you know you can do because you've done it. You're not asking them to do something that they haven't done before. They have to get back to playing clean football and knock this off where you're giving the other team extra possessions. We can get to defense and all those things, but at its core, you're right. It's about giving the ball away, which is taking your possession away and giving the other team extra possession.
D-Mills, talking about the Detroit Lions here, we asked you the question. Well, I asked the question last week. The Chicago win. I said, did it bother you that it was that close? Are you happy there was a divisional win? They got away, figured it in the end. They lose to the Green Bay Packers. Is this game against the Saints, in the Big Easy, is this a must-win game for the Detroit Lions considering the last 2 games, or am I stepping a little too far by asking that question?
Yeah, I don't know if it's a must-win because you still got you're going in with a 2.5-game lead, and you're 3 up in the loss column. So I think must would be a lot, but Braylon, it's a big game.
Yeah.
Can we say that? Must is up here, big is here. If we can do that,
I like that.
You don't want to be going to Chicago on a 2-game losing streak because that's going to be a tough game against the Bears. They're playing better, okay? They got a quarterback that is still struggling, but that defense is playing better. They're going to be a tough game in Soldier Field. So you got to nip this thing in the bud as fast as you can. They haven't lost 2 games in a row in 21 games. You got to go back to October 30th of last year to find the last time the Lions lost 2 in a row. That's the kind of resolve you need to have in this game, the ability to bounce back, the ability to be resilient, and that's what I'm looking for. So, look, if they come out of this thing losing, you're not going to feel great, but you're also not going to look up and figure, oh, my gosh, 1 week and Minnesota could be right back there. You've built yourself a little bit of a cushion, but you can't let this thing snowball. So, listen, it is an important game for this team to get back on track, play the type of football that they're capable of, for the standings and for their psyche and for their confidence to know that they can get back and do that again.
Talking to the Voice of Lions Radio, Dan Miller, also Fox 2 director. Dan, last question for me. I'm going to let Maz, he's chomping at the bit to get in here and talk to you. If you're Dan Campbell or Ben Johnson, what's the conversation that you're having with Jared Goff this week? Because Jared Goff is the guy for the offense. It's the offensive line that gets it going. But Jared Goff has been the leader for the Detroit Lions on offense the last 2 years. What's the conversation you're having this week with him?
Remember that guy who was turning the ball over when we were 1-6 last year, and then that guy turned it off like a faucet and stopped turning the ball over? Find that guy. I need you to be that guy. When you're in the pocket, be ball conscious. Understand that you got to secure that football, and there's guys swinging at you trying to knock that thing away. Get back to understanding where you can and can't throw the ball. Now, he's had a couple that were just dumb luck when they get tipped, and they get tipped right to a defender. But Jared Goff knows what ball security is. He also knows what it is to have issues with turnovers, because it has been a problem at times in his career. But when you look back to the last 10 games of last year and the way that he valued and took care of the football, you know he can do it. That's the guy that you have to get back to. And that's probably what gives me the most confidence about this whole thing, like I said a moment ago, is you're not asking this team to do something that they haven't done. You're just asking them to get back to what they have already done.
All right, Dan, you know where I'm going. You called me and Ken
Probably
Brown the kings of the waivers. Kings of the waivers. I'm sorry, man. But you're now down Alex Anzalone, okay? You're down another linebacker. You don't have a pass rush. Why the hell is Shaq Leonard visiting Dallas and Philly? Why don't he even hear that he could come here? What is the roadblock of talking to these guys?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what the roadblock is, and I think probably each one is its own separate conversation that they have within the building, and I don't know what their conversation on Shaq Leonard has been. Some of the talk that came out of him being released by Indianapolis was that he had slowed down. He is an off-ball linebacker. He's not a guy that's necessarily going to come in here, and he's not going to come in here and solve your pass rush issues. So, look, I don't know what kind of money is being talked about. I do see that he's visiting some of the teams that the Lions would ultimately have to compete against in the playoffs. It becomes clear that that's just not something at this point that we know of that they don't think is a fit. I don't have their answer for you, Maz. I just think that you can continue to look at this thing, see the way that they're doing business, whether you like it or not, and they just don't seem like they are the type of team that's going to go outside the organization and trade for a Sweat or trade for a Young or one of these guys. It just that's the choice they're making right now. I don't know if Leonard would be the upgrade that some of those other guys might have been, because they would hit right in the sweet spot that they need some help in. But we're going to get a crash course in Jack Campbell this week and whether or not he's ready to take on a full-time role in this league, because he's got to, and he's the next guy up, and he's going to be playing out there for a lot next to Barnes, and he's got to be ready to go. He's a first-round draft pick. It's go time.
Look what you said. I mean, Montez Sweat. Look what he has done for that defense in Chicago. They look like a different team. That's a pretty good Bears defense. You said it. I watched it on Monday night. They hold the Vikings to one touchdown. They got it. They scored the last minute of the game to get a touchdown. They wound up beating them anyway. But, you know, Montez Sweat changed that defense. And we signed Tom Kennedy today. I like Tom Kennedy. But, you know, I just don't understand it. I've been watching football a long time, too, and I know I'm not a general manager. I'm a pretty good fantasy general manager at that, though. But that's all I got for you, Dan. I just can't. I don't get it. That's all.
Not this year.
I don't think Tom Kennedy and Montez Sweat are apples to apples. I think Kennedy, for whatever reason they signed him, was probably more of a veteran than Dylan Drummond at this point. I don't think they signed him. I don't think it came down to them talking in the office a couple of weeks ago and saying, trade for Bryant. That Kennedy re-signing in Week 13 is going to be tough. So let's hold off.
Yeah, I got it.
So, I mean, I don't think you can draw a comparison there.
I'm not.
Look, I get it. When you see teams that you're competing against loading up at a position that you need help at, I get the questions. The only thing I can tell you is, from the outside looking in, it's just not the way that they're going to do business. Those decisions ultimately may dictate success or failure for them. What they do and how they do it is going to ultimately bring about the questions that we ask of them, and the success or failure that they have will be part of that equation. So no, I completely get it. I draw the line at the Bryant Young, Montez Sweat, Tom Kennedy conversation.
That's fine.
Hey Dan, Aaron Glenn and the defense been under fire the last couple of weeks, and again, I do give him a little bit of a pass here. If you look at the last 5 weeks in those 11 turnovers, they did not do this in the first 6 games of the season. First 6 games of the season, 5-1. Giving up 21 points a game. Last 5 games of this, next 5 games, giving up 29 points a game. So these turnovers are killing this defense, and I don't know what the defense is supposed to do about it when they are put in a bad position time in and time out. What can Aaron Glenn do to help these guys along here on the defense?
Yeah, it's sometimes, Ryan, feels like the eye test doesn't match the reality. It feels like things are going worse defensively. And then you look up and you say, man, in the second half of that game against the Packers, they only gave up 6 points, and that was on a short field after an ill-fated fake punt. That was it. They didn't give up anything else in the second half of that game, and actually gave them a chance to win by doing that. So, look, I think, and we've talked about this before, I feel like a broken record. To me, it is still about finding some way to improve that pass rush, make quarterbacks uncomfortable. No sacks against the Packers. They had 2 against the Bears and none against the Chargers, I believe, if you go back, or maybe I have that flip. But the last 3 games, 6 against the Raiders, 2 in the 3 games since then. It's not all about sacks, I get that, but you do at some point have to make the quarterback uncomfortable, and making that quarterback uncomfortable then allows you to maybe take the ball away. And that's one of the focal points that Dan Campbell talked about coming out in the second half of the season, is finding some way to get some takeaways. Put the turnovers aside for a second. If the defense can start taking the ball away a little bit, that changes the way that you view it, and I think maybe there's not as much heat on Aaron Glenn. But I get it. It's frustrating at times, but it's also one of those crazy things where you look up and you're 3-1 in the last couple of games, but you balance it out. Okay, 5 consecutive possessions the Chargers scored on. The Bears actually scored on 5 consecutive possessions. The good thing was 4 of them were field goals. And then Green Bay comes out first play of the game, 53-yard pass, and yada, yada, yada. But look, they can be better. There's no doubt. And to me, a lot of it still boils down to what's happening up front. Outside of 54 and 97, I don't see anybody winning. And you need other guys to win up there to try to slant the board a little bit in your direction and make some quarterbacks throw it before they want to, make a mistake, and that's where you can flip the game.
Dan, speaking of up front, but on the other side, how much of the different rosters in terms of the starting position for the offensive line has been a bunch of different sets for the offensive line this year due to injury? How much of that may be now starting to catch up a little bit? You see 3 sacks this week, 2 sacks the week before, and also the rushing yards have gone down a bit from where the Lions were earlier. How much of just having different people rotate in and rotate out, guys getting hurt, how much of that's played a factor with the offensive line?
Yeah, I thought the Green Bay game was the first time that I felt like they had a bad game. The Green Bay game was the first game that I felt like that just was a bad day at the office for them. So Braylon, I'm interested to see how they bounce back. I mean, the Bears game, Bears are playing better defensively.
Agreed.
And they got to Goff a couple times, and Sweat got one in there that that was not an opportune time. But I think overall, I'm still hanging my hat on that offensive line. It doesn't help when Jonah's not in there. It's good that he was back at practice today. I don't know if that means that he's going to play this Sunday or not. We'll have to see how that thing plays out. But he's a big part of what they want to do up front. They had to pull Sorsdahl midway through that game. Awashika's a backup. The face of the team is those guys up front. Now, they've played well with injuries at times this year, but you're coming down the stretch. You want to have your best 5 guys in there if you can, and get Jonah Jackson back would be a huge part of that. So we'll see what happens. And I'm guessing those guys are hungry to get back out there coming off that game against Green Bay, because that isn't what they want to put out there on tape.
Speaking of hungry, does Dan Campbell offer any suggestions on where to get the gumbo?
He just talked about the gumbo. I haven't heard the rest of it. I'm sure he would if you asked him. But no, that's obviously one of the highlights of going down there is finding something to eat, because there's some amazing food down there, fellas, and I will avail myself.
Good stuff. Dan, thanks so much,
Thanks,
man.
Dan.
Always a pleasure,
Check out
man.
Dan tonight, Fox 2 News at 5, 6, 10,
Yes,
and
sir.
11. Check us out, Woodward Sports on Fox2Detroit.com and the Fox Local app, 2 to 4 every day. Thanks, Dan.
Hold on, I'm
Appreciate it,
still
bud.
rapping.